Thank you very much for the chance to talk to you all this afternoon. My name's Arthur and I run a small startup called BioBean. But today I'm going to talk to you about two things mainly. The first is around cities and how we can begin thinking about urbanism in a different way through thinking slightly differently. And secondly, I'm going to talk to you about coffee, but not the next kind of frappuccino. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about the waste from this industry supply chain. I'm going to start off by kind of just talking about why cities are so important. I mean, most of us, I think, live in cities. Most of us are Londoners. But cities are really, really important. They're not only the foundation of human civilization, but they're also hubs of social and economic power that drive development by concentrating skills and resources in one place. I'm going to use kind of a medium which in fact essentially is talking about why cities are not just the kind of the concentration effect, but also they're a massive amplifier effect as well. So they, through this concentration of skills, essentially they take challenges and they make them much, much larger than they would otherwise be. And they kind of amplify and enhance both the very good and the very bad, and that makes cities increasingly important for kind of our future as a species. I'm going to talk to you about kind of why this is so important, and also about kind of the challenge that we've already kind of heard about briefly today in terms of the kind of rapid urbanization and what that's going to look like and what it has already looked like so far. I'm going to use the medium of photographs of my various family members in skirts to be able to illustrate this. So this is my grandfather, and when he was born in the mid-1920s, the world's population was still pretty small and predominantly rural, with only about 15% of us living in cities. When my father was born, in the 1950s, that had already doubled in terms of our urban population, with around 30% of the 2.8 billion people on the planet living in cities. And when I was born in the beginning of the 90s, in 1990, again, massive growth further. So 43% of the world's 5 billion people living in cities. And what's going to happen over the next kind of 35 or so years is going to be this trend is going to continue. And to my mind, it's going to be the most important trend in the 21st century. Because by mid-century, by 2050, the 9 billion or so people living on the planet, of those people, about 3 in 4, 75% will be living in cities. And this is a really, all these figures, they sound quite kind of disparate, and it's quite difficult to actually know what this looks like. But this is a really phenomenal thing that's happening to us, because for the first time in human history, we've become an urban species, and this is going to make a huge difference in terms of how we start to think about how we live, and about what the kind of technologies and innovations we're going to require to live as a predominantly urban species. And to kind of show you what that looks like, a world that's kind of predominantly urbanized, and over the next 35 years, that kind of rapid growth in terms of our urban population, that's around adding a new one of these, a new New York City, to the face of our planet 7 times every year. And not just on a one-off basis, that's 7 times a year for the next 35 years, adding an additional 250 New Yorks to our planet. So it's not a small change, it's going to be absolutely massive, and we need to really address how we begin to design and think about the challenges. Because that urbanization, it not only means that we're going to grow our urban population is going to grow, but it also means that the challenges that we currently think of as global problems are going to be massively enhanced, and also that they're going to be interconnected. Everything from infrastructure to our water supply, everything from our diet to our economic prosperity, everything from our waste to our energy supply. These are not just global challenges, but interconnected urban ones, and they're going to be massively amplified and enhanced by cities. And let me give you an example of what I mean by this, by taking a kind of a problem I think most people would think of as a global problem. In fact, it's usually referred to as global warming, and that's climate change. We typically think of climate change as a very large global problem. You have kind of important and exciting people standing on stages at places like the UN and stuff like that, saying, "We've got to tackle this," which we do have to tackle it. But often we think of it as something that's insurmountable and something that's very difficult to address and come over. But if we take the pretty basic stat that all of our global CO2 emissions, around 80% of those are directly attributable to cities, then I think we begin thinking about something that we generally call a global problem very differently when it's demonstrably an urban one, with 80% of those emissions attributable to cities. And of that 80%, again, when we think of cities, we might think of thousands and thousands of cities all over the world. And again, it's a very big and difficult problem to address. But we can reduce that right down, because a very large portion of that 80% of emissions is attributable not just to any old city or the thousands across the globe, but just to 35 megacities with populations of over 10 million people. And again, it's just about reducing the scale of these problems and saying, if we can kind of reduce that impact and reduce us thinking about these very grand and nebulous problems like climate change, if we can reduce it right down to 35 megacities, we can begin to tackle the vast majority of an issue such as climate change. And for me, this is a kind of a really quite exciting opportunity, because while cities can also enhance the bad things that are out there, if you can reduce emissions in one of these 35 cities, that can directly correlate the bigger picture. And it's kind of, for the first time in our history as humanity, if we kind of can make a difference on a local basis in a small geography such as a city, we can for the first time have a really global impact, in the same way that things like software and we've kind of obviously kind of had a huge innovations in terms of things like software and the internet and whatnot, and what they have enabled us to do is in a similar way to have an individual to make a very large impact through the medium of computers and the internet. In this case, the city acts as a similar technology in terms of something to be able to amplify and enhance that massively. So a slight slide change, but I know what you're thinking, kind of, that's all very well, Arthur, but where do you fit into this? And so I'm going to kind of now change tack a bit and swing right round, because my interest in this goes back to my studies. I studied architecture here in London and became very interested in two things. One of them was cities, as I've already bored you with. But the second thing I got very interested in is this behind me, which is waste. And very interested in how we can reorganize and reimagine urban supply chains, kind of tying these two interests and trends together. And my particular interest was coffee waste, because one of the projects I was set at architecture school was designing a coffee shop and coffee factory, one of the fun tasks you're asked to delve into. And in this case, I was looking at how we can take the waste from that building and make it useful. So I was looking at a kind of a closed loop system and how we can take the waste the building kicks out. And it was, much to my tutor's disappointment, I took this challenge a bit too seriously, and now spend most of my life kind of delving into that. But my main interest was kind of, a lot of architecture students got very kind of interested in the aesthetics of the coffee shop. Should it have a brick wall or a metal wall and these sorts of things? But I was very interested in the waste, mainly because I found out just how much coffee we drink and also how much waste there is out there, and also that the waste is pretty interesting. So we drink about 500,000 cups of 500,000 cups. We drink about 70 million cups of coffee every day. And that's about 1,000 cups a second. So it's loads of coffee. How many of you guys have had a coffee? Or I imagine most of you. Coffee today, guys? Yeah. 2 coffees today? Yeah. So if more than 2, yeah, nice. So we drink, as I say, about 1,000 cups of coffee a second, and that's just in the UK. And that kicks out about 500,000 cups, 500,000 tons of waste coffee grounds each year. Again, just in the UK. Cost the industry about £80 million to dispose of it, in terms of both, in terms of kind of disposing it, and it generally ends up in places like landfill sites and whatnot. And it also kicks out a couple of million tons in terms of CO2 emissions. And so discovering kind of the just amount of the waste out there, I decided to kind of delve further into it, and I ended up setting up a company to begin tackling the problem. The company I founded is called BioBeam. And what we do is we take these waste coffee grounds, we work with the existing supply chain and turn them into 2 fuel products, both a biodiesel, which is a liquid transport fuel used for powering various urban transport systems like cars and buses and trains and stuff, and also biomass pellets, which is a heating fuel which is used in place of things like coal and wood for heating buildings. I'll talk you briefly through how we do it. So we work with a variety of different kind of waste companies who deliver us the waste coffee grounds, and we're doing this not at a kind of a small kind of we're in Hackney, so it's often kind of more hipster style things, but we do it at quite a big scale. So our factory is able to process about 50,000 tons of waste coffee grounds a year, which is around 1 in 10 cups in the UK, or the way I think of it is about 100 cups a second, which is, again, I like my 100 per second facts, but it's quite a lot of waste coffee grounds. The coffee is then taken to our factory. We take the oils out and we turn these into diesel, and then we take the residual biomass and we pelletize that and turn these into these solid fuels. They're then both distributed and then sold, in some cases, back to the people who actually give us the coffee grounds in the first place, because a lot of them own lots of coffee shops and coffee factories and that sort of stuff, and they need heat and they need diesel. This is one of our trucks. You may have seen it going around London. And this, maybe next slide, is our factory. You see it's big, it has a chimney, it's got lots of exciting machines inside. And there are lots of, I was there earlier today, and there are lots of kind of men doing manly things like welding and lifting machines, and lots of coffee there. This is our diesel. So, as I say, coffee is a very good thing for this, because not only is it really highly calorific, it's more highly calorific than wood, in fact. It's also got a very high oil content, so it's got about 20% oil by weight. And this oil has got a variety of different applications, like interesting chemicals and whatnot, but also can be turned into this diesel fuel. And these are the biomass pellets, which are used, as I say, interchangeably in the same infrastructure as a coal or wood. And that's really kind of the key to what we're interested in. It's not about kind of building a whole new infrastructure behind it, and it's not about kind of doing this at a small scale. It's about kind of taking a lot of a certain feedstock and turning it at an industrial scale, and so that it can then be supplied into an existing infrastructure to displace conventional fuels. In terms of what this looks like from a CO2 perspective, because at the end of the day we're a green energy company, and there's an economic play here, but also environmental one. For each ton of waste coffee grounds we recycle using our technology, we save about 6.8 tons in terms of CO2 emissions. Again, I mean, not too many of you, I imagine, are going to be kind of climate scientists or environmental or sustainability managers or whatnot. So in terms of what 6.8 tons in terms of CO2 looks like, because it's actually quite a big saving from a single ton of waste coffee grounds. And that's the equivalent of driving a car or a London taxi from here in London all the way to Beijing and back twice. And that's from a single ton. And remember, our factory is able to do about 50,000 of those a year. So it's a fair amount in terms of saving from an environmental perspective as well. And so this kind of brings me back to kind of where I started around kind of talking about cities and the importance they're going to play in our future. Because it's clear to me that if we're going to be going through this rapid period of urbanization, and most people in the world are going to be living in these very large urban centres, that cities need to change, and we need to first kind of understand them and then begin to address some of the challenges that they're going to kick out. And also to understand that these are not just these kind of vast, nebulous global challenges, but uniquely urban ones, and ones that are interconnected by cities. And everything from our physical and mental well-being to, as we've heard earlier today, our diet, to our water security, energy security, and our kind of housing, etc. These are not global challenges, but uniquely urban ones. And if they're going to be caused by cities, as they increasingly are, it's going to fall to cities to solve them. And again, as I say, I mean, to me this is really exciting, because if we can change our locality, we can then change the world on a much larger scale than with a relatively small impact. And I think getting cities powered by coffee is just the start, because one thing that this has shown me, I mean, my background is certainly not in either waste or biochemicals or biofuels or any of these exciting things. Mine's from an entirely different architectural background. But if there are opportunities like this out there, the fact that coffee previously was being and still is in most of the UK and around the world being put into the ground at a cost to both the economy and the environment, I think how many similar opportunities there are out there. And to my mind, I mean, if we can really narrow our focus and kind of essentially develop a whole new generation of different urban designers who are really focusing on this, I think it's going to be a very exciting kind of urban future for us. And I think that every kind of new person who comes onto the planet has the kind of power to create and innovate and disrupt the status quo and leave their city, where it happens to be, greater, better, and more beautiful than it was before. Thank you all very much.